welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Here today with Seun Opanubi. We're having a fireside chat in preparation for the masterclass coming up in a few weeks on Agile ways of working and how that can impact, Gen AI and all the new technologies that are coming up yeah. So over to you, Sean, first. Introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce Leap, and then I'll introduce myself as well.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Hi, everybody. My name is Seun Opanubi, founder of Multi-Passionate Consulting. I help and empower Scrum Masters to be able to foster a good environment that allows their team to thrive and create quality products for their customers. That's me, yeah.
Oh, great. So I'm Andrew Mugoya. I'm the co-founder of Leap. Leap is a framework, a set of interventions that helps to empower people to learn digital skills from each other. So we believe in learning by doing, and we believe in learning from your peers collaboratively. My background, I've been a technologist way longer than I can remember, about 25 plus years. I started as a developer, then eventually became an entrepreneur. I founded a couple of companies. Most recently, I worked for a fintech based in London. I was helping them grow globally. And then I went back into entrepreneurship through Leap and another entity that I run as well. So jumping straight into it. So a bit of background, Sean. Why don't you tell us about your journey? How did you end up in as an agile expert? How did you start? What did you study? And what's your journey been career-wise?
Hi, thanks. So I graduated from City University. I was trying to remember the name of my university there. From City University with a bachelor's degree in computer systems engineering. Funny enough, after graduating, after a few years, I was doing odd jobs, from working for a consulting firm to insurance, until I landed a job in a publishing company as a systems analyst. And it's in that organization that my career, if you like, began to evolve. So I started as a systems analyst, ended up as a business analyst, did some project management work. And from there, I just stumbled across agile ways of working. And it was all by accident. It was because the organization was undergoing agile transformation. They were piloting this with a different department, with the third party they had invited to come and help with the transition and transformation. Somebody reached out to me to say, "Oh, this is going on in this department. Would you be interested? You've talked about becoming a project manager. We've been trying to find something for you, but maybe this might, pique your interest." So I attended, and firsthand experience, I got to work with the Scrum Master.
Okay.
And it's from that exposure that I sat down and I was dazzled because I had not seen projects being displayed in that way. So what I mean is, I saw what transparency looked like. I saw what collaboration looked like. I saw what autonomy looked like, where the teams were involved in, coming up with ideas and in resolving issues. And that was totally new for me because I had worked in an environment where they told you what to do, you got on with it. There was no questions asked. The task was there, you got it done, and then you fed back, this is what I've done. But here, there's a board showing you all the work that's in progress and how much progress we're sort of arriving at the goal itself. And then also you're seeing how the teams are sitting down, having conversations about this is the best approach, and people are challenging each other, but they're not being rude about it. There is such psychological safety that people are free to bring to the table their ideas, their opinions, and there's challenges going on. Not because I don't like the way you're doing it, but I'm challenging you because I'm wondering how that's going to best suit the customer.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
to see
yeah.
all of that firsthand and see how people were enjoying that way of working, for me, I thought, now this is the kind of environment I want. I want to be able to work like this. And that's where I started to learn more and wanted to even stay
Mm,
beyond
mm.
the sort of trying it out period.
Okay, okay.
And it's from there that it grew, and I just learned more about my growth by attending lots of communities.
Okay, okay. Well, it's interesting you frame it that way actually, and I like how you frame it as agile ways of working because you and I have spoken about how agile, the noun, capital A, has now become a very strict, defined way of doing things. And I also like how you're right about that. Those early days, those of us who had done project management before in the old ways, where it was very, it was hierarchy based, waterfall, bureaucratic. There was very clear rules and there's a lot of separation and silos. Agile was this breath of fresh air where it just felt organic, collaborative, conversational. It's almost like we're all pulling in the same direction, whereas before it felt like different stages and departments were fighting each other to get the project done. So you're right actually. Like when I think back now, the old ways. I did Prince too, so the old ways I can definitely attest to how bureaucratic
Yeah.
those were. But I'm curious to hear from you. You say agile ways of working. What's your thoughts between agile ways of working and agile, and how have you made that transition in your career? And how do you separate those two definitions?
I've had conversations with people, and when they talk about, oh, we're agile in the way we work, or they talk about business agility, and
Mm,
when I dig deeper and ask what they mean by that, they're just referring often to being able to just, or when there's something happens, we can just be flexible. In our
mm.
organizations, when we see changes, we can be flexible about it. But how do you go about being flexible? Are there any processes in place? Not
Mm.
necessarily.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
then realized that the word agile has just been used interchangeably. You go to certain organizations and they will say things like, oh, agile with a capital A or agile with a small a.
Okay.
And it's
Okay.
not until you dig deeper that you realize the word agility is just being used. Well, in essence, they're looking at the basic dictionary meaning, and that's
Yeah.
what they're
Okay.
coming up
Okay.
with is that
Okay.
agile
Yeah.
allows you to be flexible.
Mm,
But
mm.
I often, when I talk about agile, I often I feel like I have to make a complete sentence and say
Okay.
agile ways of working because I
Okay.
want to invoke the idea of the agile ways of working, which incorporates that umbrella of different practices where
Right. Okay.
you can talk
Gotcha.
about Scrum, you can talk about Kanban, you can talk about lean ways of working, you can talk about XP. And when you start to break it down that way, people are much more familiar with it because people often think, you know, is Scrum agile? Is agile different from Scrum? But I think people just need to have that full understanding that
Mm,
agile itself is just a wonderful way of expressing the different practices that comes under it, which is
okay.
where
Okay.
it also envelopes Scrum and other agile practices.
So it's very interesting. So, which brings me nicely to my next question, actually. So, what are some of the challenges you've experienced in trying to either promote agile or get organizations and teams to work in an agile way? Obviously, yes, there's that misconception as to what agile is, and I've also experienced that. You walk into a room about agile, it literally means different things to very different people. Some people are very bureaucratic in terms of this is what agile philosophy says, and this is the steps we need to follow. And then there's some people who just go, agile means we're flexible. We can change things as and when we need to. But what are some of the challenges you faced starting off with that misconception as to, do
Yeah.
you need to like reset the baseline first for everyone before you can actually move ahead? Or like how does it translate into day-to-day delivering of
Yeah, I
projects?
think the way Agile has transitioned in different organizations, often you can tell when you walk into an organization and you've been told, oh, you're coming as a Scrum Master. Well, lucky for you, this team's already Agile in the way they work.
Mhm.
And usually, anybody that goes into a new organization to start helping the team out, one of the first things you want to do is just observe the way they work, because if you're there to identify areas in which you can help them to improve, you don't
Mm,
just go in and then start making changes. You want to see how they work first, and then
mm,
you want to then give feedback or start to identify, and just say, right, okay, what are the low hanging fruits and how can we help you out? So usually when I go into organizations and observe the way they work, you start to see, maybe you started off agile, but there are certain sort of anti-patterns I'm noticing, or there's certain
okay.
things you're doing that's not quite agile. And
Yeah.
so in some cases, you want to sort of bring back the baseline where necessary. In
Okay.
some
Okay.
cases, if it's not necessary, you leave that out and then you just help them to improve. You identify the areas where, right, you need to strengthen the way you do these things here. In some cases, they do say they're agile, but when you then start to show them the areas in which they would need to improve, then you get resistance, because this is how it's always worked. And you're challenging why they're working a certain way and they're not used to that. Or they're very mature in themselves as developers or what a data scientist or whatever it might be.
Mm,
So
mm,
you then have to almost then bring it back to baseline, where you want them to improve. Because at the end of the day, you have people working in an organization with different maturity levels of agility.
mm,
So
mm.
I would often have one-to-one sessions with each of them and
Okay.
get to understand how long they've been doing agile in their workplaces, if not in that place, but maybe elsewhere.
Yes.
And then
Yes. Yes.
try to understand from each of them what agile means to them,
Mm-hmm,
so that I
mm-hmm.
can understand across the board in which areas I need to then make it almost a playing field, a level playing field, so that when we build on anything, we're building on the same level of foundation, and
Yes.
any
Yes. Yes.
misconceptions are identified and tweaked, if you like, so that everyone's not coming with different ideas. So he's making
Okay.
sure that we all understand what agile means in this organization and how we can build on that. So
Okay.
it's breaking
Okay.
down those barriers, when they come.
And you're right about the one-to-one conversations. I think it's interesting how a lot of times project management is down to those soft skills of just trying to get people on board. The project is actually sometimes even the least difficult process. It's trying to get everyone on board, understand the processes, buy into the philosophy. Um, or what about things like retrospectives where again you're not trying to assign blame, but you're trying to go, what did we do right? Not what's been your experience again culturally across organizations trying to get that? Because I found from an agile perspective, that's probably one of the bits that I find very difficult. People going, I don't want to blame, but I want to blame, or I don't want, or I want to take a lot of the credit. Like, what's been your experience around those kind of things?
Yeah. Going back to the organization where I was first exposed to agile ways of working, one of the key things I always remember that we took away, or I took away from that, was whenever we ran the retrospective. I don't know if this was supposed to be some sort of, I don't know if this was their tradition, but once before the retrospective session started, the first thing that was read out was the fact that a reminder to the team that the way the outcome of this product delivery has worked out was
Mm,
because we have worked in such a way that we worked based on the information, and I'm paraphrasing here, based on the information that we have known or we knew at the time of doing this work.
all
That
right.
is what, so that is where all the actions that has taken place
Okay.
has
Yeah.
resulted from. And therefore we did what we did based on information that we knew. There was no blame is assigned to anybody.
Okay. Okay.
And so
Okay.
when you start with that, it means that any conversation that goes after that is everyone
Mm,
owning their own part.
okay. Okay.
And then that way you're removing the sort of blame culture from the atmosphere and
Yeah.
allowing people to just speak about where they were coming from when they were working,
Okay.
and not
Okay.
assigning blame to anyone. And this is where it's then easy to be objective and then, right, okay, we did this well as we worked well together. We perhaps could improve on this because maybe we didn't communicate better, well, and this we dropped, and of course we dropped a ball. but it's a we thing. We did this together, and therefore, if
Okay.
everyone takes ownership,
Okay.
we make
Okay.
sure that next time we make sure we have those conversations where there
Okay.
is assumptions. We will make sure we don't assume, so that when we're moving forward, everything is being done based on what we know, and because we went as far as getting clarity where we didn't have clarity.
Oh, wow, I really like that actually. I wish actually someone had given me that phrase years ago. Actually, I like that
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah. It does
safety
help.
net.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
does
because you're
help.
right. If you don't set that tone, I've had where the statements being made is no blame. We're all doing this together. But I like that clarity around we're all working on based on the best information we had at the time.
At
That
the
that
time.
that
Yeah.
makes it and it so which brings me nicely. So what's been your experience then with, if you could compare private sector, public sector, again, in terms of adopting agile, using agile, what's your observations around that?
Yeah. My experiences has been majority in the private sector and
Okay.
very little
Okay.
in the public sector. However, I have both direct and indirect experience in the public sector. And my
Mhm.
indirect experience has come from friends and family. So I have family members who do work in the public sector, as well
Yeah,
as lots of friends, as well as the agile community as well.
correct. Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
more often than not, I get to hear from them issues and pain points that they're experiencing, and then
Hmm.
we as a community, because of what we call collective intelligence, are able to then bring insights and say from our point of view and say,
Good,
well,
good.
have
Yeah.
you tried this, have you tried that, maybe this would help. So that's been my experience. But the actual experience I've had, when I worked for the public sector, I actually didn't know anything about Agile at the time. I didn't have any
Hmm.
Agile experience. But what I did notice was a lot of paperwork, a lot of bureaucracy in the sense that it took a long time to get tasks that, in my eyes, were simple to get done. It just took so long to get it done, to
Correct.
the
Yeah.
point that even some of the tasks I was given to do, I was really frustrated with the policy around it. That
Hmm.
I even went to the person I was reporting to say, have you ever thought of doing it this way? Because this is really time consuming, but if we try to do this, it's a
Mm.
bit more efficient. And the response you get is, that's the way we do it. We've always
Yeah,
done it that
yeah.
way. And that piece of work I did at the time was just, like I said, for a short stint. And so I didn't feel like I had the power to be able to make those decisions.
Hmm.
However, having said all that, like I said before, once speaking to relatives and friends who had worked in that environment and hearing a lot of the pain points, it often came down to that, again, the bureaucracy, but
Yeah,
also
yeah.
the budget. The public sector don't always have the budget that the private sectors have. That's not to
Mm.
say that the private sectors don't have similar issues in
Hmm.
terms of adopting agile, but they are much more readily available to be able to do it.
Okay, okay, okay.
It's great when it's done well,
Mm.
and it's painful when it's not done well. But when it's done well, you can see the benefits. In
Agreed.
the
Yeah.
public sector, I have seen that there are attempts to adopt agile ways of working. There are some places where it is done well, but
Yeah.
there are some places where it's just the amount of time it takes to actually get things done.
Okay, okay.
Um, and that's where some of the frustration comes from.
No, and you're right. And one of the reasons why we're excited to have you on this masterclass is because we're also seeing the same thing with Leap, which is there's definitely an appetite for agile. Um, but what I find different with my limited experience in public sector, similar to you, most of my experience has been in the private sector. Michael has obviously mostly been in public sector, so he knows this way better than I do. But it's interesting because in the private sector, we'd put together policies, but they were rarely ever followed, right? At least not to the letter, let's put it that way. Whereas in the public sector, the policies are literally followed to the letter, right? So you almost lose the spirit of the policy and you follow the letter of the policy. And in the private sector, you lose the letter of the policy, but you so it's obviously and obviously there's pros and cons to that, and sometimes people completely go off script and and just completely lose what the policy is about. Then they're rarely refreshed and looked at. So that
Yes.
difference is quite stark, is what I've noticed. But I said one of the reasons we're excited is there's definitely an appetite now, not just for Agile in the digital departments, but for Agile across even the policy departments. So we've done some work with a couple of departments where you can tell they want Agile ways of working, even in the policy departments. Previously, it was just maybe the technology and the digital departments. And then they also want to see, how do we collaborate with Agile ways of working across multi-departments? So if you're coming up with a policy, we involve the digital people. If you're doing something digital, we involve the policy people, and vice versa. And so yeah, so it's I think that I think that limited experience also helps. So it's something that we're hoping we can leverage in the masterclass, which brings me nicely to starting to look at a sneak peek of some of the things some of the ideas you have for the upcoming masterclass. Anything you can share so far that
Yeah.
you can
Yes.
anticipate?
Yeah, I think one of the things we'll be looking at is how agile ways of working can be adopted in the public sector using generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
I said before, the public sector are already looking at things like this, especially wanting to deal with the thousands of phone calls that the HMRC receives in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at addressing things like some of the many phone calls they get for various things. And there's another point that I'm trying to remember now, but I can't. But yeah, I'm also hearing some generative AI tools that have been designed. One of them
Mm-hmm.
is called Humphrey. I was looking that up. There's quite a few articles that shows that there are efforts being made. The things that I believe that the public sector needs to tackle are things like you mentioned policy, is
Mm-hmm.
moving from policy first to people first. So with
Yes.
agile ways of working, because agile is more human-centric design,
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at collaborating with people and spending more time in testing things and having those conversations. When the public sector can get this right, you will have, not only would you have autonomy, but you would also have buy-in. You have that engagement
Mm-hmm.
with people. Another thing that Agile would help in terms of the generative AI to be well adopted is Agile also looks at iterative experiments.
Correct.
So, for example, in the people who work as social workers, they have
Mm-hmm.
loads of caseloads that they need to deal with, and they go and see somebody and may perhaps spend an hour talking to this client or customer. After that conversation, they need to go away and then document everything they've said.
Correct.
Now, if you're not able to do that when you're having a conversation with a client because the client wants your full attention, you're probably going back in your car and you're sitting down to have those
Correct.
document that. You don't have an hour to do that. So if the public sector can perhaps look at trying different tools that they can use to take notes by
Mm-hmm.
getting consent with the clients, taking notes and trying out different tools.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then once you've given different sort of social workers different tools to try out, then you can do a retrospective and then
Correct. Yeah.
have these conversations and say, you must have obviously criteria. So things like which one is more accurate and gives us less kind of auto corrections so that you don't
Yes.
want to lose the context of the conversation you've been having. Which one is easy to use, which one's less risky, which one allows us to really follow GDPR policies, and looking at those things, but not working in silos, looking at ways
Yes.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
incorporating, and therefore you're engaging other organizations within the different sectors. So you're looking at cross-functional. So the tech is talking to the developers, talking to the data scientists, talking to the stakeholders, talking to the customers, so that
Mm-hmm.
you know that you're engaging the right people in conversation. So by the
Correct. Yeah.
time you end up deciding on a tool, you realize that this is fit for purpose because everyone that's going to be engaged in that knows how it works. I've
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
seen that firsthand. Another example is when my niece needed a specialist. She was only 2 at the time, and she needed to go and see a specialist. And I accompanied, because I was just curious. I accompanied them to the appointment. And I sat in when the consultant was having a look and checking things out. And as he went on his system, he typed everything in, and the system just lost the work he had just documented. And I looked at him, and because I'm somebody with a tech background, I was asking questions. What just happened? And he explained, and he said, I'm getting really frustrated. This system is actually only 2 years old. We just had it changed from what we used to have before. At least that one worked, because I knew that one well enough. This one's not working. Keeps bumping.
Yes.
And he just went off. And I was at a position when I wish I could do something, but I couldn't. And as he went on to start typing it out again, I then made a suggestion, and I said, perhaps it might be better if you opened Word and typed it there and copied and pasted it. And at least if it lost your work, it's still in Word.
Yes,
but
yeah.
as I said it, I also realized that's just more work. How many times is it going to do this with every client? And it was funny when he then started to say, in fact, there's a talk that there's going to be another system being introduced. And out of curiosity, I asked him, did anybody talk to you about what you needed the system to do before? And he said no. And I was shocked, because I was like, you're going to design something for someone, you have to feel the pain as well. You have to experience. So it's all that cross-function. I think this is where the policy needs to shift to the point where they're looking at, I need to understand what the customer needs to be able to design something that will be fit for purpose for the customer. And I think those mindset shift needs to happen. And that's where Agile can really help the adoption of Gen AI for the public sector.
No, I agree with you 100%. I think it's like I said, it's very timely, because the technology is almost changing much faster than the policy can keep up. And they're being forced to go, if the only way we can actually keep up is to have an agile ways of work. Otherwise, if we're to evaluate new tools using the old policy where it was taking 6 months to approve a project, by the time we're approving it, something else has come in, right? And we're being left behind. And so yeah, I think it's very, very timely. I think the reception is a lot higher than it might have been before, because I think they're realizing the technology is simply changing, way too fast. And same thing with delivery of projects. I think we've seen projects where it's gone pear-shaped. We all know about the post office scandal. We know about, and there's many others. The NHS has had scandals where they've launched software, it hasn't worked, it hasn't been fit for purpose. It's cost hundreds of millions of pounds. And now they're realizing we need to be working again back to Agile with the stakeholders, with the actual users. It's like, I think, like you said, it's a human conversation. It's more back to, if we'd made this human from the beginning, as opposed to a top-down bureaucratic, we've done this, take it or leave it. You wouldn't have things like the post office scandal. You wouldn't have NHS projects going pear-shaped. You'd be talking to the actual, stakeholders. So, no, but I think that's quite exciting. And so is that what we should look forward to in the masterclass? Is there a way you can just break it down, what the participants should expect in terms of the content and takeaways from the masterclass?
Yeah, there's going to be opportunities for the people, the attendees, to be able to bring up their own, whatever it is, pain point within the organization, and we can have a chance to look at how, well, some suggestions about what, maybe if you try this might be something you might be able to take back to the powers that be who can make those decisions.
Correct. Okay.
But also, one thing is identifying what those problems are, but also showing people, well, if you adopt this approach, this could perhaps help you in the long run, or maybe something you can start doing now and adopting now before that time comes. So it's helping people to identify those agile ways of working that they can start looking at adopting now. And then when those generative AI solutions come into play, where the talks about doing that comes up, they're able to then say, right, okay, we know how to do this because in Agile, this is how this works.
Correct.
So identifying areas where they could be working in silos as well. I think that's another big thing, is where there's a lot of silo working and people don't know what's going on. And if you start making developments in one stage and you don't involve other people, you could build something that the other teams are not able to use. So what
Correct.
do? You start again, or do you? So we're looking at that as well.
Okay.
So yeah.
One thing we've heard from previous attendees is advocacy. So a lot of them are coming in, and their biggest frustration is they believe in the philosophy, whatever that might be. Previously, as communities of practice, and imagine in this case it would be agile. But one of their biggest challenges is how can I be empowered to then advocate for this philosophy that I believe in back into the organization? So in this case, I'm imagining there'll be a lot of agile people who believe in agile, but they're going, how do I get everyone else to believe in agile? And I think the combination of going agile can help us adopt Gen AI a lot faster would be some of the tools and insights I'd be looking for. So I'm sure we'll be able to share some of those as well. So okay, so I think we're coming close to the end of conversation. I think we've covered most of what we want to talk about.
Okay.
Any closing remarks? What are you up to next in terms of career-wise? You've talked about your journey so far, the things you're doing. Anything that you want to close with that we can look forward to? This is for you to share anything that you want to share, any
Yeah, I'm trying to
announcements.
think. I've got my fingers in many pies currently. So working towards putting together a lightning talk for the Scrum Master Summit, the Global Scrum Master Summit.
Okay.
I also have something coming up soon, which is working with women in tech in Uzbekistan.
Oh, wow.
So working on that as well. But I think
Are you flying
it's
out there, or is that
no,
virtual?
it's there. I think we're trying to be sticking with net zero and
Okay.
being as sustainable as possible, as green as possible.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, no, it's going to be both of which are going to be online. Who knows what's going
Okay.
to come out of there? Maybe I might travel at some point. But for now, we're green for now.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I just to say to the attendees, come with an open mind. Come ready to challenge your current way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
See if you're open to having a new mindset shift, and if that's going to happen, what challenges and what questions you need to ask in terms of when you challenge your status quo.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you look deep down and really ask yourself or answer the question, just because we used to do it this way and it's always worked, does it mean that we continue to do it this way? Bearing in mind the changes that are happening outside your sphere of work, and you can
Yes.
see
Yes.
what generative AI is doing to speed things up for other people. We don't want to be left in the dust. So how can we move safely to where we want to go? Because I know we fully understand we're dealing with data, people's data. We want to be
Mm-hmm.
responsible about how we collect that data and process it.
Okay,
So
that sounds
come and
good.
learn. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And on the Leap side, again, we're also looking forward to the masterclass. We're looking forward to future events as well. We'll obviously shout about your upcoming events and your talks. And yeah, really looking forward to it and sharing insights and templates and resources with the attendees. Thank you everyone for listening to the Fireside Chat. If you've got any follow-up questions, the masterclass will have a space, a community space where you can ask questions before the masterclass, during and after. So feel free to ask any questions, and we'll be sure to try and answer them either during the masterclass or before and after. Thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to seeing you in the masterclass.